Hello and welcome to another episode of Bring the Fire. Today I'm joined by Jesse Beltran. Jesse is the former president of ICAACT. He's a long-time investigator of RF emissions, covert technologies, and direct energy exposure. Jesse, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So you were a firefighter paramedic previously.
Yes.
So you've had some amazing and some crazy experiences, no doubt. What led you from that to start kind of looking into this stuff? Is it something that you experienced when you were on the job?
Not necessarily on the job. After I retired as a firefighter paramedic in the United States, a phenomenon happened to someone who was very close to me, my son's mother. And I met a gentleman by the name of Dr. John Hall, who wrote two books. The first book was called Satellite Terrorism in America. And in that book, he wrote about this phenomenon that happened to someone close to him. It was his fiance. And then his second book he wrote was called Guinea Pigs, Technologies of Control, which is, he writes about my work and my efforts to help victims of this phenomena. The way it started was I met Dr. Hall in San Antonio, Texas, in the US, and we got on this topic about individuals that he was seeing who were complaining about what is now known or defined or classified by the US government as Havana Syndrome or anomalous health incidences. And they claimed that it started in 2016 with our diplomats in Havana, Cuba.
Right.
They were hearing some strange auditory sound, followed by short-term, long-term memory loss, brain fog, severe head pain, nausea, vomiting, vertigo, and electrical shocks to the body, which is called buffeting today. And they claim it's happening to not only our diplomats in the US, but the best of the best in the CIA, FBI, and it's now happening to congressional members in the United States. So I can say this as fact, that when I met Dr. Hall and he was doing preliminary RF scanning of these individuals because they say they're hearing this signal. And we said, well, if this isn't mental illness, then we should objectively be able to detect these signals in some fashion.
Yeah.
And so he was using, on sporadic cases, what was called a general frequency detector, called a JM20 Pro. And he was finding anomalous signals at very specific focal areas around the human body. And I expressed to him as, well, isn't that enough to at least go to a general practitioner and get further studies or diagnostics? And he said, no, what was happening, because they're talking about this auditory signal, that they were being railroaded into the mental health industry, right, further victimized and forced medicated or forced institutionalized. The same thing happened with the diplomats. The United States government didn't believe them in the beginning. They called it mass hysteria or psychosis phenomenon. They also blamed it on cicadas, crickets at one point. Crickets at one point. They didn't take it seriously until the Canadian diplomats started having the same symptoms. And that's when they took a serious look at it. And on May 8th of 2024, the Department of Homeland Security held a congressional hearing in which a gentleman by the name of retired Colonel Greg Ed Green testified that this phenomena was real. It was happening on the homeland. And again, he talked about it happening to the best of our best, and it was taking them out. The issue that I had of contention is that because they're saying it only happens to federal employees, we know that this has been happening to US citizens, at least until at 2010 when we were documenting this. I started a mass study where we were asking individuals, if you were having these symptoms, please come talk to me. I expected maybe a handful of people, and 100 people showed up at our first meeting. I knew we were onto something because they all had the same complaints with very little deviation. So I said, well, let's start doing mass scanning, RF scanning, along with surveys so we can get statistical data, take these subjective complaints and turn it into objectivity.
Yeah.
And my first meeting to do RF scanning was in Davis, California, in the US, and 300 people showed up.
Wow.
Yeah. And what was interesting is the data started to paint a very distinct picture back then. Those who were most affected by this were Caucasian females, recently single, widowed, or divorced, and highly educated, then Caucasian males, African Americans in the same categories, Asians, Hispanics, and it dwindled down from there. That was consistent to the Midwest of the US until we got to Chicago towards the East Coast. It kind of flipped because the demographics are a little bit different. Where Caucasians and African Americans were in the number one spot, then Caucasians. And that was consistent to the East Coast, except for one anomaly, which is up in Virginia. In Virginia, I was invited by a group of military subcontractors. They all were experiencing these same symptoms back in 2010. And ultimately, that resulted in me being brought to Europe, where a government agency asked me to come and test some of their employees and diplomats at the embassy there. And they said, if you have anyone that you believe that this is really happening to, please come. And they allowed me to use a research university's anechoic chamber. And an anechoic chamber is an environment which blocks out huge frequency spectrums. These things cost millions of dollars. And so the average everyday citizen would not normally have access to this. So because we were detecting frequencies at very specific focal points, and people always ask, well, what are those? It's going to be the right left TMJ area, the nasal dorsum, the occipital portion of the head, the base of the neck, the scapula areas, right or left arm, lower lumbar, and the quadriceps, and occasionally down into the biceps. We were seeing a pattern in the normal civilian population, the incarcerated population, and the military, those who were in the military. Their patterns could be superimposed over each other, and you can tell what they were just by the way the pattern was outlining.
Right.
And ultimately, in that anechoic chamber, what we did is we used a control group. That means someone who didn't have these symptoms, and tested them in the environment. And we were using frequency counters, and the frequency counter would read 0. So we were really excited about that. And we said, well, this is the perfect environment, because our hypothesis was this: there has to be something unique about the individual that allowed them to receive the signal. Right. If indeed this was an emission from them somehow. When we put the symptomatic individuals in that environment, after testing the control groups, which read 0, we read frequencies. So it is at that point that we realized that for whatever the reason, we didn't know what it was at that time, that they were emitting a signal. And it is not normal for the human body to emit a signal.
No.
Ultimately, what that led to is the surgical removal of biosensors. I talk about one of my earliest clients, the Bonnie Kellerby case, in which 3 biosensors were surgically removed from her. So this is a phenomenon that was happening pre-COVID. And when we scanned individuals pre-COVID, usually it was about 8 to 10 locations on the high side that would come up positive. We have had a drastic increase in the number of victims who are complaining about these same symptoms, which is now called the Havana Syndrome, or anomalous health incidences is now the newest acronym. Right. That is being utilized. And what we are finding post-COVID is now this increase of symptomatic individuals who were coming to me and saying, could you please scan us? We're hearing this frequency. We are experiencing electrical shocks in our bodies, and they're having all the same symptoms. And now, on average, we are finding 12 to 13 locations, and it's gone way up from there. Yeah. That's very specific focal areas around the human body, and it's not random. And so we were really puzzled. Why the sudden increase? And our hypothesis now is that we now know through research and studies out there that unfortunately in that jab, there was nanotech. Now everyone says, well, what's nanotech? How do you know? Well, they've looked under high micron spectroscopy and found these what are nanorobots? And they go, well, how do you know they're nanorobots? What are they? There's a gentleman by the name of Dr. Ido Bachelet in 2013 gave a TED-Med talk in Israel. And in front of the audience, he holds up a 1 cc syringe. And he says, this was just brought from my lab. And at the tip of this needle, just the tip, are 1,000 billion robots. And the interesting thing he also does in his presentation, and anyone can look up this presentation. It's a TED-Med talk, so it's out there.
It'll be on YouTube, yeah.
Yeah, go on YouTube, look it up. He also shows how they can self-assemble, self-replicate into anything that they're programmed to do. So it's using computer language, coded language, in order to get them to do what your end goal is. These things can carry a payload, and they're manipulated through RF emissions, right, strangely enough. And he also teaches his students in the university how to control these nanorobots with a joystick from your Xbox controller once they're in a host. Okay. And so we strongly believe now that that is the phenomenon that we're dealing with now. You're lucky if you have the larger technology, which can be surgically removed or identified in a medical study. Now we're dealing with the nanotech, and the only way you're going to be able to detect that is to get a lab test to see the levels of graphene oxide in you. Right. And graphene oxide are silicone-based materials that this nanotech is made of. The studies are showing that not only is it in the Pfizer vaccine, the Moderna vaccine, it's now in anesthetics. So xylocaine, lidocaine, when you go to a dental office, all of them have been tested and they're all coming up positive with the same nanotech materials in them. So that is how I got into this, as crazy as it sounds, really was because it happened to someone who was very dear and close to me. But that should answer your question in the long run.
It's both enlightening and terrifying. Do you think that's what COVID was about? An excuse almost to get this stuff into people.
Yeah, that was one aspect of it. It definitely was a way to do that because everyone, you couldn't do anything unless you had a COVID vaccine. In the United States, we were being restricted to even go to a basketball game to see our children play, or allow them to go to school. But the real Trojan horse is this. Dr. Sherry Tenpenny talks about the hydrogel. And that hydrogel was in the PCR tests.
Yeah.
So who on this planet did not take a PCR test? I would argue that very few of the lucky ones refused it.
Yeah.
But where were you sticking it up?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I never did, so I'm one of the lucky ones. But I always wondered at the time why, if I can go and infect the whole room, why it needed to be stuck up all the way up into essentially the blood.
The mucous membrane, across, and in this nanotech, when you talk about nano, these in Dr. Ido Bachelet's presentation, he talks about being 50 nanometers in size, just one robot, and that's 2,000 times a human hair. That's how small these things are. So you would never visualize them on any medical imagery, an X-ray, CT, MRI scan. The only way you're going to detect these in toxicology type studies. There is a doctor who was close to some individuals in my team. Her name is Dr. Hildegard Staninger. And she, back in 2010, was ringing the sirens about this nanotech. Quite frankly, I wasn't on board with it. I didn't believe it. It seemed pretty out there. But I have to recant my position because she was spot on. everything that she predicted in her book on this nanotechnology has been 100% accurate. So you talked about you didn't take the test, you didn't get the job, I'm assuming.
No.
Okay. But there's a shedding phenomenon, which I found very hard to believe. But it appears that the shedding phenomenon is real and is active. That means if you were exposed to someone who has had either the vaccine or has had the PCR testing, that there is this shedding phenomenon, which in essence, there was a study actually done here in the UK, a small study in which they were detecting MAC addresses on 10 individuals in the study. Out of the 10, 8 of them had the vaccine. 2 did not. So they were curious as to why the 2 were admitting MAC addresses. And it turns out that their partners did have the vaccine. And so it does appear that the shedding effect is real and it's alive today. What is very disheartening, we not only use the JM20 Pro, I also am certified in what is called TSCM, which is Technical Surveillance Countermeasures. And in that field, you use what is called a nonlinear junction detector.
Right.
And what that does, it tests for silicon-based materials or semiconductive materials. And we have now moved away from, we still do it. We still help those who are symptomatic, but we're now testing the general population. And just recently we had a retreat in which people of high academia come of all different backgrounds because we want to educate the general population about this phenomenon. And I'm also a master hypnotist, so there is a suggestibility and a programming aspect of this phenomenon. And after I did my presentation on positively reinforcing the subconscious mind, everyone wanted to be scanned. And I was quite surprised. But I said, okay, what the heck? What harm can it do? Typically, people who aren't symptomatic in the past always come up negative. But 100% of those individuals came up positive for indications of semiconductive material at the same very specific focal areas that we are finding in the symptomatic individuals. So now I have a hypothesis. Those people who are symptomatic are turned on, and those who are not symptomatic are turned off right now. And there is some literature out there that this, because we know it's frequency based and the manipulation is frequency based, we know that this has been in the works for some time.
Yeah.
In the US, there's a New World Vistas report. It was put out by the United States Air Force to keep them a superpower, or us a superpower, 50 years into the future. And this was released in November of 1994. And on page 89, there's a chapter called Biological Processes. And it talks about utilizing this RF technology to manipulate the human biological processes. In addition, it talks about imprinting memory sets and erasing memory sets into the human mind.
Wow.
So that was in 1994, but we got that report through a FOIA request. You can even go back further into 1972, in which the United States, unfortunately, has been known to experiment on the less fortunate. Who are the less fortunate? Those in prisons, those in mental institutions. But in Vacaville Prison, they were doing experimentation in 1972 with biometric telemetry. That means that they were already able to remotely monitor body temperature, heart rates, respirations, things that can be measured in that aspect. But what was interesting is it also says they were able to remotely read thoughts.
Wow.
Yeah.
See, I'm thinking, obviously the nanotech in a needle, you can obviously connect that into the COVID jabs and stuff. But there's a lot of talk now about stuff being sprayed from the skies, which was a big conspiracy theory. Like going back, not that long ago, actually, I had friends that were kind of awake to conspiracy. Like they talk about 9/11, but when you went into chemtrails, they'd go, "Oh, mate, come on, come on." Whereas now, I hear friends of mine, people that would probably be considered normies, for want of a better term, that will look up and go, "Oh, yeah, I thought it was going to be a sunny day today, but it ain't now because they've been out spraying." And you're like, so do you think that's a way that this could be getting into us and into our food? Maybe?
When we take a position or an expression or disseminate information, we always base it on factual data. And if you look at the patents that are out there, we know that there are patents of this being in the food. They say to track the food to where it's being disseminated, where it's going, and that's all for, but we're eating it. So if you're eating it, it's going to go in you naturally, right? We do know, there's, with the chemtrails, we know there are techniques to spray various materials and chemicals throughout the air. So one would conclude that, yeah, it's quite feasible and most likely probable that that is being done. We are currently looking at doing a study on homogeneous groups. We are particularly looking at the Amish, who really live a very organic life. And if we find that they are coming up positive in the same locations as the symptomatic and now the general population, then what is the modality and how they got infected? So the question would be, is it being cross-pollinated in their crops, or is it being sprayed in the air? I can say this, of the general population that we were scanning, those who came up positive in the fewest locations, 3 or 4, were those who lived out in very really isolated regions. They lived an organic life. They didn't go to the doctor. They didn't have vaccines. Those are the individuals that are coming up with the less areas. But then the question still bears, how did they get it? How did they get it? Yeah. So the hypothesis that it's been sprayed in the air is very viable at that point. But it'll be interesting to see if we get the opportunity to follow through with scanning and seeing how the Amish individuals light up.
Of course.
Yeah.
Who do you think is behind this thing? Because when you were talking at the start, you're talking about obviously American diplomats, and it makes you then think in your head, oh, this is an enemy. This is an enemy combatant. Then blame the Iranians or the Chinese or whatever. But then when it's the general public and it's happening everywhere, surely then that's not an individual government or an individual military behind that. It's going to go way higher than that.
Yeah, so it's interesting you say that. Colonel Greg Eggering testified at that hearing that this is happening on every continent with the exception of Antarctica. We now know there's a group of individuals on Antarctica who are making the same complaints of symptoms.
Right.
Okay, so then the question bears, who has the technology? Well, we know the United States does. We know that Russia does. We know that China does, and we know that the UK does, and India. So, but the United States government has taken a position that there is no evidence that this is from a foreign adversary. If it's not a foreign adversary, then who is it? Yeah. And that is just a common sense question to ask. I can say this, that the frequencies that we are detecting always go back to a military subcontractor, a research institution, research hospitals, and government agencies.
Within the United States? Or within all of those nations you listed?
Most of them in the United States. We do have a couple of cases where special ops soldiers who have come to me having these same symptoms. And by the way, the former head doctor of a 3-letter agency contacted me. I'm just a firefighter paramedic with some unique background sets. And he says, you and Dr. Hall are kind of Renaissance men. And he says, I will say this, that you are correct. There is significant overlap between the 338 Havana Syndrome federal employees that he's treating and the clients that we see.
Right.
And what he was meaning is that the symptoms were the same. He says the only difference is you have removed these biosensors, and he wanted to know more.
What did they look like, those? Obviously, because you've said now with the nanotech,
Yeah.
But the ones that you took out of how big were they, and how did you get them out?
Yeah.
Is it just a scalpel job?
So I'll talk a little bit about the history of the implants, and then I'll answer that question. So back in the 40s, it used to be a large grain of rice. We were doing this in our soldiers. And then as you got into the 70s, they became small grain of rice, 70s and 80s. And by the late 80s, early 90s, they were down to the size of a letter on a penny.
Right.
And so the technology has become smaller and smaller. The ones that came out of Bonnie Kellerby and other cases, like the Dom DeVore case, who was a nurse at the Department of Corrections in California, who blew the whistle on Department of Corrections because she became aware that they were taking prisoners to the infirmary, using advanced sedatives, implanting them with this technology. And so when she blew the whistle, they tried to fire her. And subsequently, the same thing happened to her.
Right.
And Bonnie Kellerby also had these implants removed. Don DeVore had these implants removed from her, which are pretty much identical to the Bonnie Kellerby case. And there are other cases out there. They all look alike, but they're very, very tiny. You can see the nano wires, and then they use chain of custody. Dr. Hildegard Staninger spearheaded Bonnie Kellerby case, the Bonnie Kellerby case, utilizing chain of custody and the micro photographic images were taken of these. They were analyzed in a lab, and all of it came back to be nanotech and computer components.
This is extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah. And so people say, well, what do now it's nano. I said, well, yeah, you're right in that aspect, but it's still an implant. It's an electronic implant, something that's been put inside of you. And I would argue that this has been non-consensual to the entire planet. The crazy thing is, at least in the United States, I don't know what the laws are here in the UK, but I would assume that they're similar. This is legal to do. In 2016, President Obama instituted the 21st Century Cures Act, which was sold to the US population as a way to fight the opioid epidemic crisis. But hidden in that language was a section called 3024. And in section 3024, it says it is legal to experiment on US citizens without their consent, as long as it doesn't exceed minimal risk criteria. So the question bears, well, what is minimal risk criteria? And the definition is nothing that doesn't happen in normal everyday life. So I would say this: does death happen in normal everyday life?
Well, getting hit by a freight train happens in real everyday life.
Correct.
So that's
bizarre. Then the data, this is for all research institutions. The data is protected by national security protocols. So if you even do a FOIA request to see if you're on an IRB, you're not going to get the information. So you can't even take legal action based on that. In 2024, the Biden administration, prior to transitioning to the Trump administration, extended these protections to private military subcontractors and research institutions. So they are now, all of that data is protected. What's even crazier now, when you go into medical facilities, I just met 2 clients and I didn't believe what they were saying to me. They said, when you sign to give consent, one of them was a pediatric dentist. Client was taking his children to have them seen. And he says, read this paragraph. And in the paragraph, it says your data, you're consenting to your data can be shared with government agencies, law enforcement. It listed the NSA, the FBI. Why are we sharing data, health data, on children with these agencies? And I had an older client, an adult client, who said, they're sharing my data with the NSA. I go, what are you talking about? And he showed me the same consent form, but written in a little bit different fashion, but it is still being shared with government agencies. The question is, why do these agencies need to know our health data? It's really bizarre.
It is.
And unfortunately, I think what we are dealing with is a fork in the road for humanity. Because of what I know this technology can do, it can manipulate mass demographics. This does have a significant subliminal programming aspect to it. It's all frequency based. There are a lot of studies that support this now. So and remember I talked about the New World Business on page 89, imprinting memory sets and erasing memory sets. So you can take a memory set from one individual, imprint it into another individual, and continue to do that. Now you can do that to mass populations, right?
Complete
how powerful?
amnesia.
Yeah, how powerful of a tool can that be? President Putin gave an interview to The Political and said, the first superpower to master psychotronic weapons will be the superpower to rule the world. If we don't stop this now, if the global society doesn't stand up against this, your children, your grandchildren, and their destiny of even having some semblance of free will is gone. They're already trying to initiate this biomedical convergence. The health industry is now the Trojan horse, and it's been militarized. And this is what we're dealing with today. This is the true mark of the beast.
So because I was thinking about it, like, of course, there's a lot of people that you said basically haven't been turned on yet. So in my head, I'm thinking, well, if you want a mass depopulation, then you can turn on a frequency, people start dropping, say it's Ebola or something, whatever. Or even you could, by putting thoughts and perceptions and emotions into people's head, you could create a civil war like that to bring in some form of legislation, emergency legislation. But now I'm thinking, well, if you just get people to just comply and go along with it, you don't even need to do any of that, right?
Yeah, well, I can tell you that the sources that have been given to me say that when 6G starts to arrive, that's when the majority are going to be turned on. And there will be no such thing as free will. Me as which I didn't talk too much about my background, along with being a firefighter, paramedic, and TSCM certified, I'm also a certified master hypnotist. And the reason I did that, because I could see that those who were most affected were individuals who tend to fall on the higher suggestibility scale. These were doctors, lawyers, judges, you name it. I've seen all walks of life. But they were losing $1 million businesses because they were being affected in this way. I had two cases actually. One is Aaron Alexis. He was a military soldier in the US, and he called me and he says, I hear you can help me. And he's having the same symptoms as the Havana Syndrome, federal employees and the civilian population, the clients that I see. And I said, yeah, I can, but it's not a quick fix. It's a long road. I can help you obtain the data if this is truly the phenomenon that is affecting you. And I thought he was going to go along with it. The next thing I know, he killed 12 people at the Navy Yard on the East Coast in the United States. And in the butt of his rifle, he inscribed the letters ELF, extremely low frequency. I had a lawyer, an attorney out of Florida. His name was Myron May. He called me, same thing as the Aaron Alexis, complaining about the same symptoms. And I said the same thing to him, this is going to be a long journey, but I can help you in that way. And he says, I don't have time for this. I have bigger fish to fry. I thought he was going to do some lawsuit. And then he went and killed people in the research department at the University of Florida. And you start to think about all of these cases where you have these individuals who are acting out in this way. And you have to wonder, is that part of this program?
Yeah.
I would argue seriously that it is.
You can create the terrorist, right?
Correct.
So what can people do? Do you think, is there anything that you could do? Because obviously, you're talking about, well, first of all, you've got to identify that you've got the issue for a start. In the early days, when it's a small grain of rice, you can cut it out. When it's nano, I'm guessing not. Is there anything that people can do? Because I'm thinking people watching this are probably feeling as alarmed as I am.
Yeah. There are a couple of things you can do. First off is every one of us knows who our true identity, our true spirit is, what our true moral compass is. If you ever get anything, that's the first step, being aware, being educated about that this is there and it's out there and it's happening now. That's the first step. So you can identify, well, there's a thought that just came into my head. It's very adverse to what I would normally think about. Because you identify with your true self, your true spirit, you know how to, you're more aware to push it out.
Yeah.
The other thing is, because we're now dealing with this nanotech, and I've been very left-brain. I've never supported any product out there or anything without having the data. There is a product which is called Zeolite Z. It's naturally formed by Mother Earth, where you have volcanic happenings and diatomaceous earth, which meets the sea. And it creates this zeolite Z. It's all natural substance. It's a negatively charged. And what happens when you take it, it basically grabs the graphene oxide and it binds with it, and then it's excreted out of your body through normal processes of urination, defecation, sweat, women menstruation, all of that. And so they have done studies and monitoring the graphene oxide levels. And after about 90 days of being on this, it's called Masterpiece, it does drop down to a minimal level. Doesn't get rid of everything, but because we're constantly exposed to it. But that is the two things that you can do immediately. Educate yourself, identify what your true spirit is, and get on that Zeolite Z as quickly as possible. The other thing, I have a very talented team, because we know that this is computer-based languages, and there's like 3 different languages, disciplines that you need to know. We're trying to establish and decipher the protocol that is being utilized. And we strongly believe, and we're close, that if we can establish that protocol, we'll be able to come up with a cure to make this stuff inert.
That's positive.
Yeah.
I've heard of Zeolite and Masterpiece as well. Actually, something I've heard of before.
Yeah.
I feel like I need to get myself tested now, because I didn't take a PCR test. I didn't get jabbed. None of my family did. My wife and kids obviously not.
Yeah.
But like you say, I play sports. I play ice hockey. I'm barging into people left, right, and centre. So you just don't know, do you?
No, you don't.
That's crazy. So just finally, then, where can people find you? People watching this that are probably just had their minds blown. Where can they find you and read your work and learn about what you do? So, as
you said earlier, I was the former president of ICACT, which is the International Center Against the Abuse of Covert Technologies. We initially had that organization to implement the first study. Now I'm the president of an organization which our main brand is called MindNexusLive.com. And you can go there and get on our email list and ask whatever questions you want, and we can guide you and coach you, because we handle the technology side and we coach people through the process. We don't practice medicine. We don't claim to be a medical practitioner of any sort, so we need to make that clear.
Yeah.
But we we can coach you, and we do now have some physicians who are willing to help. And they're putting a lot at risk, but a lot of the medical community started to become very awakened to this phenomenon, and they are willing to stick their necks out and help. For example, the doctor who did the Bonnie Kellerby surgery was told she cannot remove any implants out of a human being again. And she says, no, these people have paid a lot of money to come see me and get this done. I'm going to follow through. And they found a way to basically take her medical license away. So this is what was happening. But now, it's a serious issue.
It's huge.
Yeah. If you have this in you, there's a new term for the human species. It's called Homo Borg Genesis. And then my question is, if you're no longer considered human, then what laws are there to protect you?
You have no human rights. You're not a human. Right?
Correct.
Mate, Jesse, thank you so much.
No problem.
I really appreciate you talking to us.
The idea is to create a situation in which the human body is connected to a hive mind.
In an organic, earthly reality, life is in a constant movement of creation. The ending of one expression in form slowly withdraws while another comes into manifestation. It's in humanity's blueprint to be able to fit into this organic cycle of life. But sadly, it's in the collective mind of humans where a seeming sabotage has taken place. A hijack by a nefarious force which throws humans out of alignment with the natural, organic flow of life. And over time, humanity has deviated so much that the mind has become diseased, and the result is the increasing decline of life on planet Earth.
Been warning for decades now about the plan to change the nature of the human body to a much more synthetic state.
You're seeing what appears to be graphene oxide.
As we merge with AI in this way, we will become a hybrid species.
There's been a lot of talk about humans emitting a MAC address.
All of them had Bluetooth signals.
Is there somewhere within you a memory of before all this?
It's absolutely vital that people with that kind of mind and knowledge and expertise focus their attention on how to eliminate this stuff from the body.
I felt like the poisoning that was happening, I could see that it was the number one thing that was preventing everyone from being that bright, happy people that we used to be.
I believe the story goes that he was walking around the woods in the middle of the night and he sort of got a download as such.
This is how it should be. This is how it should be. It should be like clear screen.
This is amazing. Your intuition was right, Matt. Nailed it.
Come on. Sweet.
It's not too late. We can still choose an organic future. What do you wish for the generations to come?